Andrew Bailey, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Very soon you'll assume power as perhaps the city's most important regulator. And given that the previous structures have manifestly and obviously failed, what can we expect to see from the PRA in the coming months?
Well, because I mean, to be clear on the new system, it is what we call a Twin Peaks system. So it's a Prudential supervisor and a conduct supervisor. And so Martin Wheatley will be the head of the conduct supervisory authority, as the other, if you like, sort of powerful regulator. So what you will see then, and this goes to this point about having the Twin Peaks system, is much more focused regulation, where prudential regulation and conduct regulation are very different activities, they're different skills. So we are much more focused. I think we have much clearer statutory objectives in the new legislation that has recently been passed by Parliament. Our objectives are very clear. It's the safety and soundness of the firms we regulate in the context of the stability of the financial system. And that's important because previously I don't think enough attention was placed on that context of the stability of the system as a whole. For insurance companies, we also have a policyholder protection objective. You will see us being much more forward-looking, more judgmental, and more focused. Just to give you an example, I always say to firms that when I go to see senior management and boards, I want to come along to you and only talk about, I'll pick this number slightly at random, but not much, the 3 or 4 big things that matter to me to achieve my objectives, which I observe need to be dealt with in your firm. I'm not coming along with 30 small points that we've observed as sort of failings of compliance here and there. You should be doing that yourself. We're very focused, and it is, as I said, forward-looking, because we have to look at the risks ahead to judge the safety and soundness of firms.
Well, there'll be those who will point to the crisis and say that the PRA must be much tougher on the banks. There'll be those in the city who say that regulation should be as light touch as possible. I mean, it could be a system of twin peaks or a system of twin mice squeaking at the big banks. There's a line to be drawn. How do you find that balance?
Well, I think you find that balance by having very clear objectives, which must come from Parliament, because we're accountable to Parliament. That's why we do the job. And being able to explain those to the banks. So it's very important to be able to explain our objectives so that they understand what we are doing, what the public interest is. And I devote a lot of time to explain to boards and senior management what we are seeking to do, the risks that we're seeking to ensure that they, if you like, are robust to. So that when I talk about, we talk about intensive regulation, people talk about intrusive regulation and light touch regulation. I mean, I don't have any difficulty with being intensive and intrusive, but it has to be focused. That's the point. It has to be focused on a clear understanding of the risks to public policy. And then we are able to explain to senior management, the people who obviously don't like regulation as a sort of matter of habit, you need to understand why we're doing this, why Parliament has told us to do this.
And in 20 or 30 years, when people come to assess whether the PRA has been a successful institution to that point, what will have made it successful? If it is a success, what are the factors in that success?
Well, this is a fascinating question. When I look back to the reforms of 1997, so that's not quite 20 or 30 years ago, but it's 15 years ago now, coming up to 16 years. And I was very, very closely involved in those, and that was when the Monetary Policy Committee was created. It was when the FSA was created. It was literally in the first days of the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown government. When we look back on that, one institutional structure has survived, in a sense, stood the test of time, which is the monetary policy system. I mean, the country, lots of people debate and argue about whether the MPC should do this or do that month by month, but they don't actually call into question the institutional structure. It's robust. The same is not true, and has sadly not been true, of the FSA and regulation. So the answer to the question for me is that if in the next 15, 20 years' time, we have a system of regulation which is viewed as institutionally robust, And by the way, a key point of the MPC's success is its clear accountability to Parliament, which again the FSA never achieved. If again it's clearly accountable to Parliament, it is transparent for what it does, the public understands what it does. I don't expect people to agree with us all the time, they won't. We will be unpopular, we will provoke debate and disagreement, that doesn't matter. But if it has stood the test of time as performing transparently in an accountable fashion the public policy objectives that we've been given, then that's success.
And I mean, the tripartite system, also the FSA, the Bank of England, and the Treasury that was set up in 1997 has drawn a huge amount of criticism, some of it perhaps politically motivated. Do you regard that as fair?
Well, I think that the criticism of the tripartite system is that the objectives were not properly set out. Now, I have a little bit of, I have a lot of background in this, because I was heavily involved. I worked personally for Eddie George when he was governor at that time. I was present when he discovered the Monetary Policy Committee was being created. I was involved in that. I was present when he found out that the FSA was being created. It was done in 1997 in very difficult circumstances. That's sort of a matter of history now in terms of the FSA's creation. I think that coloured the creation of the tripartite system. I've also sometimes said that the unfortunate circumstances, which are well documented now in various biographies, mean that the tripartite system was almost like a sort of set of people trying to create a peace treaty who weren't really at peace. And that laid the foundations for, I think, a sort of lack of clarity of objectives. Now, interestingly, of course, we then went into a prolonged period of peacetime. Mm. So for the first 10 years of the existence of the tripartite, nothing ever happened. No crisis, no bank failed. We played some war games and the system played some war games, but nothing much happened. So it wasn't tested. And sadly, the weaknesses that were inherent in the system were never really subjected to testing. Meanwhile, the system was becoming more and more dangerously over-leveraged, so that the eventual scale of the tsunami that was going to hit us got bigger and bigger. And that, again, is part of the history of the failure of the tripartite. But it's not a failure in the sense of saying, these people should never meet. I mean, of course they should, because they're performing public policy functions. The problem was they didn't have proper objectives. And so there wasn't this clarity of what are the objectives, who's doing what, and how is it transparent.
And it's a time of change, with the restructuring and with a new governor as well, the Bank of England. Would you say that Mervyn King has been a success or a failure, and what would your advice to the new governor, Mark Carney, be?
Well, I've worked with Mervyn King for over 20 years, and it's very important to remember that Mervyn King joined the Bank of England right in the beginning of the 1990s, and it is very important to remember back to what the state of the British economy was, what the state of monetary policy was at that time. It was a system that was, frankly, in a mess in many ways. It had been characterised by chopping and changing of regimes, none of which had actually properly taken hold, all of which lacked effective credibility. And the two big figures for me are Mervyn King and Eddie George. They're very different figures over that period of time. One of them, sadly, isn't with us anymore. But those two people between them should take all the credit for the fact that we have a regime today, particularly in monetary policy, which is a lasting regime. It's the first time Britain has had a successful, stable monetary policy regime in as long as anybody can virtually remember. So he deserves a huge amount of credit for having done that, and I think that when people look back on it, that's what they will say. Now, in terms of what advice I would give to Mark Carney, well, you're coming into the Bank of England at a very exciting time. The Bank of England is getting new responsibilities. It's growing for the first time in any of our working lives. It's going to be a larger organisation than it was before, with new responsibilities. But there is a tremendous responsibility on Mark and all of us at the top of the bank to obviously dispense those responsibilities. We've got to put a completely new structure of governance, oversight and accountability into place, because the Bank of England is rightly looked upon as being a potentially over-powerful citizen as a public policy maker. We can deal with that, but to deal with it, we have to establish, I think, and by the way, Mervyn King would agree with this. This is not in any sense going against what he would say, is a wholly new level of transparency, accountability, and oversight of what we do. Because if we don't do that, then there will be a very strong public suspicion that the Bank of England is too powerful. It will be suspicious, and it will be suspected, and it will undermine our ability to perform our job effectively.
Looking to the future, then. And as a final question, a broad question, but as you said in your talk, it's the Holy Grail. Can we ever beat, abolish, move beyond too big to fail?
Well, I suppose I'm ever optimistic. Why I'm over optimistic? Because I've had to deal with these problems over the last 5 years, and they are the hardest thing that you can have to deal with if you're in our line of business. So the lasting, lesson of that is that we have to do everything we can to solve it. I don't underestimate the difficulty of doing it. It involves a number of key things. It involves designing, which we're doing, a whole new approach to sort of dealing with failing banks. It involves more powerfully, if you like, getting public acceptance of that. Because as I said in my talk, this involves, having the powers to change people's property rights. It has the power to actually, reduce the value of people's investments. That is not ever going to make you popular. So having the legitimacy to do that, and people understanding that this has to be done, and that they accept why you're doing it, and in a sense enable it to happen, it is absolutely crucial. And thirdly, having had a long history in resolving banks and having to do weekend resolutions, not recently, but over the time, the devil is in the detail with this stuff. These are too complicated an institutions, no question about that. But these are hugely complicated issues which have to be worked on. You can do it. You can do it. I'm absolutely sure of that. But it is the thing that is going to be most difficult, most challenging. But we've just got to keep going at it.
Andrew Bailey, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.